Have you ever wondered if the very people you call family, the ones who promise to protect, support, and love you for life, could also be the ones to push you into the deepest pits of suffering? This isn't just a story of loss or about a woman grieving the child she never got to hold. It's a plunge into a living nightmare where betrayal doesn't come from enemies, but from the husband who once held your hand each night, and the half-sister you once called your own flesh and blood. I once believed I'd never be able to stand up again until the day I uncovered the truth buried in a manila envelope and saw the people I trusted most smiling as they thrived on my pain. If you've ever asked yourself, can you really be forced to choose between the truth and a world that turns its back on you? Listen to this story. You'll realize that sometimes the greatest strength isn't about revenge, but about finding the courage to go on to forgive yourself and to choose happiness all over again. Chapter 1, it all started with loss. If you've ever experienced loss, you'll understand the kind of pain I'm about to describe, a pain for which there are no words. I used to believe I was strong enough to face anything until that fateful day when everything in my life collapsed in an instant. That day, I was sitting on the nursery floor, brush in hand, painting soft green strokes on the crib that my husband and I had just assembled the previous weekend. I remember so clearly the feeling of hope in the air. It was as if the whole world had shrunk to just me, my growing belly, and all the dreams of a perfect family. Then out of nowhere, a sharp pain, like a knife twisting into my stomach, dropped me to my knees right beside the unfinished crib. I still remember screaming, crying out, and begging the universe not to take my baby girl from me. But all I got in return was absolute silence. When I woke up in the hospital, all I felt was a cold emptiness. The doctor came to my bedside, looking at me with that expression I'd seen 1,000 times in movies, the look of someone about to deliver the kind of news nobody ever wants to hear. "I'm so sorry," he began, but I didn't hear anything after that. Every sound faded away, leaving only the faint beating of my own heart. My stomach was flat, my hospital gown soaked in blood. I pinched myself, slapped my own cheeks, desperately hoping this was just a nightmare. But reality remained cold and unyielding. And so, a week passed. I lived in silence, surrounded by baby clothes, toys, tiny socks I couldn't bring myself to throw away. Family and friends came to visit, all giving me the same pitying look, some even whispering outside the door about a pain they thought I'd never get over. And me, I just sat there quietly counting the days, the nights that passed without any dreams at all. My husband Mark was still there, but he wasn't the same. I couldn't tell if he was grieving too or just trying to be strong for me. All I knew was I no longer felt any connection between us. Some nights I'd wake up and see the empty space next to me, hear the sound of footsteps fading down the hallway. Then on the night, I thought things couldn't possibly get any worse. Mark suddenly burst into our bedroom, his face lit up with something I couldn't quite place. "I have a surprise for you," he said, his voice oddly light for someone who'd just lost a child with me. Before I could react, he pulled me out of bed and led me to the living room. There, standing under the harsh lights, was Kathy, my half-sister, the one I'd cut off 3 years ago after I caught her in bed with my ex. Kathy smiled at me, her eyes sparkling, while Mark announced excitedly, "Kathy has agreed to be our surrogate. All the paperwork is done, you don't have to worry about a thing." I remember exactly how I felt in that moment. Shocked, dizzy, then completely numb. I just stood there watching the two of them, feeling like a stranger in my own home. Kathy came closer, took my hand, and whispered, "I know you're hurting, but think about the future. This baby will be a new beginning." All I could do was nod. I was too exhausted to argue, too broken to realize something was terribly wrong. I chose to believe what Mark said, that everything was for my happiness, that this was the only way to keep our little family from falling apart. But deep down, I knew something had just shifted, and nothing would ever be the same again. Chapter 2. Cracks that can't be hidden. You might think that after losing a child, I'd cling to any shred of hope just to keep going, no matter how crazy it seemed. Honestly, I thought the same. I chose to trust Mark, and Kathy chose to believe that letting my half-sister carry our baby was the most reasonable decision at the time, even though every cell in my body was screaming in protest. 2 weeks later, I started noticing things that to any outsider would have set off alarm bells. But back then, I just stayed silent, convincing myself with logical excuses. My husband's just too excited. Kathy's just trying to be friendly. Like that morning, I walked into the kitchen and caught Mark bending down, whispering something to Kathy's belly. He had his hand on her stomach, stroking it, as if he was talking to his own child. I froze at the doorway, and before I could say anything, they both laughed it off like nothing had happened. Kathy began coming to our house more and more often, and everything gradually settled into the routine of a three-person family. In the evenings, the three of us would sit together, picking out baby clothes with Mark and Kathy excitedly rummaging through the outfits left behind by the child I'd lost, holding them up to Kathy's belly and daydreaming about the future. They would say things like, "Do you think our baby will look good in pink?" But that our baby somehow never seemed to include me in the conversation. I knew I should say something, but every time I tried, Mark would brush it aside with a sympathetic smile. "I know you're hurting, but Kathy is making this sacrifice for us. Just try to get through it. Everything will be okay." I'd look over at Kathy, who was always hugging her belly, her eyes pleading for my acceptance. And me? All I could do was nod, then sneak off to my room and cry alone in the dark, clutching old ultrasound photos, unable to let anyone see how I really felt. I started to feel like a stranger in my own family. They made decisions about meals, always planning healthy dishes for pregnant women, but only ever serving Kathy. My paycheck went straight to Mark, who said we needed to give the baby the best, so Kathy's needs would come first. There were even nights when I'd come home late from work to find an empty table, no dinner left for me, while Mark and Kathy lounged on the couch, watching movies and laughing together. Once I caught Kathy taking my ultrasound pictures out of our family album, gazing at them for a long time before slipping them into her own wallet. When I asked about it, she just smiled. I just want to keep beautiful memories for our baby." I forced a smile, pretending nothing was wrong, but inside my heart felt like it was being squeezed tight. The breaking point came when Mark and Kathy started discussing baby names. They argued excitedly as if I didn't even exist in the living room. I tried to offer a suggestion, but was quickly drowned out by their idea of combining their names for the baby's middle name. "How about using Kathy as a middle name?" Mark suggested. "So our child will always know who carried them into this world." Kathy beamed at him, then turned to me, waiting for my approval. That was when I realized the more I gave in, the further they pushed me out of my own life. Every night, all I could do was hold my ultrasound photos and cry in silence. Sometimes I wondered if I'd made a mistake trusting Mark, letting Kathy back into this house. But back then, I was still too weak to fight against the two people I had once called family. And I had no idea this was only the beginning of something much, much worse to come. Chapter 3. The Baby Shower and the First Real Crack. I used to think I could never sink to the bottom of despair again, until the day that should have been my daughter's birthday. That morning, I had already made plans. I just wanted a peaceful day to go to the beach, to sit on the old stretch of sand where I first felt my baby kick inside me. I wanted to keep that last bit of peace, that tiny memory, just for myself. I woke Mark up early, begging him to take me to the beach just this once so I could remember our lost daughter. But his face suddenly lit up as if he was about to give me some wonderful surprise. "Kathy and I have prepared something even more special for you," Mark said, his eyes shining with pride. I forced a weak smile and asked, "What is it?" Instead of answering, Mark called Kathy up, and the two of them put their arms around me and said, "Today is the baby shower. You should cheer up." I went numb. They wanted me to throw a party for the baby I wasn't even sure was truly mine, on the very day my own lost child would have had her birthday. I I whispered, I'm not ready for this. I just want some peace today. But Mark's face instantly changed. Why are you being so selfish? You should be happy for the family. Kathy chimed in. Think of our child. I stood up, leaving them and their party behind, ignoring the laughter and celebration echoing behind me. I walked straight to my car, still in my pajamas, just wanting to get as far away as possible. 4 hours later, I was sitting alone in my favorite coffee shop, not talking to anyone. Suddenly, my phone buzzed a FaceTime call from Mark. Reluctantly, I answered, and there they were, cutting cake surrounded by guests, Kathy cradling her pregnant belly, Mark holding her hand. We've decided to name the baby after Kathy to honor her sacrifice, Mark said happily. They never asked my opinion. They didn't care how I felt. I hung up, fighting not to cry in the middle of a crowd. Maybe that was the moment I realized I had truly lost everything: my husband, my child, even my place in my own family. That night, I came home quietly at 2 a.m. No one called, no one texted. I walked into the house that used to be my home, now cold and unfamiliar. Mark's light was still on. He was probably up with Kathy. I went to Mark's office. He always kept it locked, but tonight I needed the truth. I forced the lock and for the first time rummaged through my husband's files. Amidst the tax documents, I found a large manila envelope that Mark always kept hidden. My heart pounded as I opened it. Inside were all of Kathy's medical records from the fertility clinic, signed IVF paperwork, and the dates on all of it, 2 months before my miscarriage. A chill ran down my spine. Clutching those papers, I tried to fit all the pieces together in my mind. I powered up Mark's computer, checking his old email logins. There was an email chain between Mark and Kathy, stretching back almost 9 months, filled with details I never wanted to see: genetic testing bills, Kathy's private ultrasound appointments, strange messages about medication. One email from Mark nearly broke me. If she, meaning me, still hasn't miscarried by May, we need to consider another option. And Kathy replied, how long does the medicine you mentioned take to work? I stood frozen, every word cutting deeper than a knife. I had no tears left to cry, only fear and fury crashing over me like a wave. I knew then that I had been betrayed, pushed out of my own life by the people I once called family. And I knew from this moment on I could never let them control my life, not for a single second more. Chapter 4: The Truth Exposed. A chilling ultimatum. I remember exactly how it felt, standing in Mark's office at that moment. The air was suffocating, the desk lamp casting harsh light on every page, every email, each line another slap in the face to everything I'd once believed. I hadn't even managed to choke back my tears when the door suddenly swung open. Kathy appeared, blocking the exit with her hand on her belly, a move she always pulled to milk sympathy. I was frozen to the spot. You know now, don't ya? Kathy asked, her voice light but icy. I didn't answer, just clutched the stack of emails to my chest like my last line of defense. Not long after, Mark showed up too, his face showing not a hint of surprise, only a chilling, almost inhuman indifference. You should never have dug so deep, he said, without a shred of emotion. My voice shook as I asked, where is the man I married? The man who used to love me? Mark just shrugged. That husband died the day I realized your genes weren't as perfect as Kathy's. It was the first time I heard Mark mention the real reason: his obsession with genetics. He was terrified I'd pass on my family's illness to our child. He wanted to fix everything neatly, which really meant cutting me out of his vision of a perfect family, making Kathy the surrogate, and eventually his new wife. But what shocked me even more was Kathy's attitude. She stood there completely confident, as if everything was going exactly according to her plan. We could all live together as one big family. You just need to stay and keep quiet, Kathy said, her eyes utterly unmoved. Mark came closer, delivering his ultimatum. You have 60 seconds to decide. Stay here, keep this secret forever, and help us raise the child. Or leave with nothing and never see your child again. Never in my life did I think I'd be cornered like this by the very people I once loved most. In that moment, I had to choose survival. I pretended to agree, acted like I'd accept my role as the temporary mother, but inside, I was already planning to expose everything. I've uploaded all the emails to the cloud, I said, trying to sound calm, even as my hands trembled violently. Kathy's expression changed immediately, while Mark's eyes grew wary, though he managed a forced smile. Good. Then there's nothing left to hide. We're family, after all. They escorted me to the guest room, announcing that the master bedroom now belonged to Kathy, to better care for the pregnancy. I said nothing, just stepped quietly into that unfamiliar room, feeling cold all over. The door closed behind me, locked from the outside. That's when I realized I was now a prisoner in my own home. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of Mark and Kathy's laughter drifted up through the cracks in the door, mixed with whispers about their next moves. I felt like a side character in my own life, pushed aside by two traitors who'd rewritten my story. But that was also the night I realized I now had real evidence. I had emails, records, medical logs, everything I'd need to expose Mark and Kathy for who they really were. All I needed was the right moment. A new chapter had begun. I wouldn't surrender. And from that second on, I knew to survive, I had to become stronger than the pain. Chapter 5. Psychological Trap. Isolation and Turning the Tables. Ever since that night I was locked up in the guest room, I officially entered the most suffocating stage of Mark and Kathy's control. That cold, unfamiliar room made me feel like a prisoner in the very home I had once designed for happiness. They watched my every move, bathroom breaks, meals, even text messages and calls. Outwardly, they played the perfect, loving family. But in reality, it was nothing but a disguised prison, and I was the outcast. The next morning, Mark brought breakfast to my room, still with that gentle smile, still with soothing words. You need to keep up your strength to get through the pain. But the look in his eyes was different now, cold, controlling, full of unspoken threats. I knew he wanted me to feel hopeless, alone, with no way out. They even warned me Mark's mom will join us for breakfast. You'd better act normal, or she'll really believe you're mentally unstable and side with us to have you committed. That was the first time I truly felt the cruelty of their gaslighting game, turning the victim into the crazy one in everyone else's eyes. Mark and Kathy took turns caring for me, but it was just a pretense. In reality, it was all probing intimidation and endless reminders about the baby on the way, that perfect little product for which I was nothing more than a shadow on the sidelines. But in my despair, I quietly started to fight back. I wrote down every suspicious detail, unmarked prescriptions, strange medicine bottles in the bathroom, even the whispers I overheard through the crack in the door. I took photos, hid the files on an old phone, and secretly sent them to the only friend I still had, Janet. One afternoon, when Mark and Kathy were out, I slipped into the bathroom. In the medicine cabinet, I found a half-used bottle of misoprostol, the same drug prescribed to me after my miscarriage to clean out my uterus. But why was there still some left? And why did it look like it had been dissolved, as if someone had tried to mix it into food or drink? My hands shaking, I took photos of everything. The pieces were starting to fit together. This wasn't just an accident, it was a plan, calculated and deliberate. I slowly realized that in the days before my miscarriage, Kathy was always coming over helping Mark make meals, while Mark made me juice every night. Every time I refused to eat or drink, they would become inexplicably agitated. The fragments began to assemble into a chilling picture. But it didn't stop there. Mark began controlling my bank accounts, draining every cent from my personal card, claiming he was safeguarding it so I wouldn't make reckless purchases in my unstable state. My credit cards were locked, my phone was put on parental control mode, and every call was routed through Mark. I was completely stripped of autonomy. Kathy grew more shameless by the day, using my perfume, wearing my mother's jewelry, even putting on the dress I wore to my very first ultrasound. She'd sit on my couch, one hand rubbing her belly, the other stroking my mother's keepsake necklace like she was the rightful owner. Despair and fury mixed inside me. I knew I couldn't just sit and wait to die. Those secret texts with Janet, the only person who still believed me, became my lifeline. She urged me to start keeping a journal of every incident to document evidence and to secretly stash documents where Mark and Kathy would never look. Quietly, I started preparing for my counterattack because I knew one slip and Mark and Kathy would have me thrown into a psychiatric hospital and nobody would ever hear my cries for help again. But what Mark and Kathy didn't realize was that the more they pushed me into a corner, the stronger my survival instincts grew. Chapter 6: Support Network and Shadows Behind the Curtain. At some point, you realize what it feels like when everyone around you believes the story spun by your abusers while you're left standing alone in the middle of a storm. That was exactly where I found myself. Mark didn't just control my finances and daily life. He took things even further. He started manipulating the people closest to me. I noticed friends drifting away. Every message I sent was met with hesitation and guarded replies. A coworker I'd once been close with suddenly texted, "Are you okay?" But her tone was cold, distant, almost suspicious. Even my workplace got sucked into Mark's twisted performance. One day, my boss called me into her office to say that Mark had contacted her, worried about my mental instability, and suggesting I take an extended leave to recover. I broke down in tears right there in her office, furious and powerless because I knew Mark had succeeded in isolating me from the outside world. Even my obstetrician, the one who'd monitored my pregnancy, refused to see me again, citing a desire not to get involved in family conflict. I realized that Mark and Kathy had systematically knocked out every last source of support I had left. I thought things couldn't possibly get worse, until one day I met a stranger at the cemetery while visiting my mother's grave. She was a middle-aged woman with patient, knowing eyes. She asked if I was Kathy's sister, and then explained that she'd once been in Kathy's medical school class. Kathy was obsessed with medical procedures, especially fertility treatments, but she dropped out after a messy affair with a married man. Her story sent chills down my spine. Kathy had a history of faking pregnancies to trap men, manipulate, threaten, and control the kind of twisted schemes that now seemed disturbingly plausible. I left the cemetery, my head spinning with possibilities. If Kathy could weave so many elaborate lies just to get what she wanted, then her plan to push me out of Mark's life, even to harm my unborn child, suddenly seemed all too real. After that chance encounter, I started actively searching for new allies. I texted Janet and asked her to help me print out bank statements before Mark drained the accounts to save odd messages, photos, and documents. Janet also put me in touch with a lawyer specializing in domestic abuse cases, someone who immediately recognized the signs of financial abuse and reproductive coercion. Step by step, I pieced together every bit of evidence I could. The suspicious medicine bottle in the bathroom, my daily emotional journal, emails between Mark and Kathy retrieved, thanks to Janet helping me unlock my old accounts. I hid everything wherever Mark and Kathy would never look, just in case they tried to erase every trace. And the most unexpected thing happened just when I thought I was at my most alone. Women Kathy had deceived in the past, former classmates, co-workers, even her ex-boyfriends, started speaking up online. One messaged me on Facebook, warning me about Kathy's history of faking pregnancies and threatening to sue both her ex and his family when her lies were exposed. Piece by piece, all those scattered fragments came together into a clearer picture. I was not the first victim, and I certainly wouldn't be the last unless I found the courage to stand up for my own truth. I never imagined I'd have to survive inside such a sick, twisted drama, but now I knew I had nothing left to lose, and I refused to let them destroy what little I had left ever again. Chapter 7: Counterattack and the Awakening of Truth. I used to think I'd be trapped in Mark and Kathy's web forever, until the moment I first realized if I used my fear the right way, it could become my weapon. After weeks of being monitored and having every move controlled, I learned how to mask my emotions. I quietly watched, memorizing their habits, the hours Mark left for work, the days Kathy was out, little things like Kathy accidentally leaving medical paperwork out on the table, or Mark always password protecting his computer but forgetting to log out of his email on the old iPad. Starting from these tiny lapses, I seized every minute I could to gather evidence. I took photos from every angle of the pill bottles with the labels peeled off, but a few pills left inside. I found Kathy's medical journal in her suitcase, detailed records of doses, timings, notes about ensuring a safe miscarriage process, and trembling, I photographed every page. Janet, the only colleague still standing by me, lent me a private phone so I could send all this data to a secret email account in case Mark tried to wipe everything. Janet encouraged me to be brave and share the truth with the psychologist Mark had arranged for me, because sometimes an ally comes from the most unexpected places. And sure enough, that first therapy session with Dr. Brennan changed everything. Face to face with a specialist who clearly wasn't on Mark's side, I poured out everything: the pain of losing my child, the strange relationship between Mark and Kathy, and my suspicions about the miscarriage. I didn't expect much, but the look in Dr. Brennan's eyes as I spoke gave me my first glimmer of hope. Someone finally believed me. I realized that to reclaim my freedom, I couldn't just fight Mark and Kathy. I had to battle social prejudice, gossip, and even Mark's own family, who believed I was fragile from grief, that Kathy just wanted to help her sister, and that Mark was trying to be a good husband. But I wasn't afraid anymore. At family dinners, I subtly brought up odd details. Kathy, didn't you once say you were terrified of pregnancy? How are you managing this so well now? Or I'd ask Mark in front of everyone, do you remember the night I had to go to the hospital with stomach pain? Why did you show up 3 hours late? Their hesitation, averted eyes, and increasingly flimsy explanations started to make those around us suspicious. Even my mother-in-law, the same woman who used to criticize me for being weak, began to question them more closely, watching their every move when I spoke. She even quietly told me, if you need anything, just call me. I know women don't make up that kind of pain. That's when I realized my greatest weapon was the truth and the empathy of people who had suffered themselves. At one tense dinner, I happened to mention meeting Kathy's old classmate at the cemetery. Kathy went pale. Mark lashed out, accusing me of digging up people's past to tear the family apart. But in that moment, I knew with just one more push, their perfect little charade would come crashing down. That night, I called Janet and told her everything I'd gathered. We decided to organize a big meeting at my mother-in-law's house, inviting everyone who'd ever witnessed or heard about the strange things Mark and Kathy had done, from Dr. Brennan and Kathy's old classmate to a few close neighbors. I knew this was the final gamble of my life. If I failed, I could lose everything. But if I succeeded, I'd not only win justice for my lost child, but finally protect myself from the toxic control of the two people I once loved most. The night before the showdown, I stared up at the ceiling, my prison of a room, and told myself, if I've made it through all this pain, there's nothing left to fear. The truth always finds its way to the light. Chapter 8, The Day, Some Truth. But that morning, I woke up early, my heart pounding like a drum. Everything was ready. The copies of evidence, my phone, with all the photos, notes on Mark and Kathy's lies, even the warning messages from Kathy's ex, all of it fit into a small bag I clutched like a talisman. The gathering at my mother-in-law's house was even tenser than I'd imagined. Everyone seemed wary, the air thick with suspicion and uneasy glances. My mother-in-law spoke first, gently asking everyone to hear me out just once before passing judgment. I stood up, my hands shaking, but my voice was steadier than ever. I started from the beginning, the grief of losing my child, Kathy's sudden reappearance, the way Mark decided everything without ever asking me, and then all the little oddities peeling labels off pill bottles, bank accounts suddenly frozen, my car refusing to start, friends drifting away, those strange therapy sessions. I laid out all the evidence. I'd prepared photos of the medical notes, the email and text exchanges between Mark and Kathy's own journal, detailing medication schedules, the testimony from her old friend about her history of faking pregnancies, even photos of Kathy exercising while pregnant, a stark contrast to her perpetual act of exhaustion in front of everyone. I talked about being isolated, having my finances seized, the suffocating sense of being manipulated and pushed out of my own life. At first, Mark tried to stay calm. He denied everything, accusing me of hallucinations brought on by depression, insisting I couldn't tell fantasy from reality after the trauma of losing my child. Kathy put on her best teary-eyed performance, playing the selfless sister, saying she only wanted to help me heal. But when Dr. Brennan entered the room as a professional guest, the tide shifted. She spoke about the hallmarks of psychological manipulation, financial control, social isolation, and most damningly cases where women were gaslighted by husbands and relatives to strip them of both motherhood and their freedom. Those who'd been skeptical now fell silent, listening. My mother-in-law, who had always sided with her son, suddenly asked Mark point blank, "Why was everything transferred to your name without consulting your wife? Why are all the documents about custody and maternity insurance so carefully hidden?" Mark stammered, trying to act confident, but his face had turned pale. Kathy couldn't keep up her saintly facade either. When my mother-in-law read out the text, "If she's still pregnant by May, we'll have to find another way." The atmosphere turned thick and heavy. One by one, people began speaking up, some defending me, others demanding answers from Mark and Kathy, some just shaking their heads, shocked and angry. I'll never forget the moment Mark lost control, shouting that I'd made it all up, set him up, and destroyed the family. But this time, no one believed him. My mother-in-law stood up and demanded Mark leave the house until the truth was clear. Kathy, abandoned, ran upstairs in tears. This time, no one rushed to comfort her. That evening, I sat in the living room with my closest friends, Janet, Emma, and Dr. Brennan, feeling like I was part of a real family for the first time in ages. We made a list of next steps, contacting lawyers, preparing for divorce, securing my assets, and most importantly, reclaiming my autonomy and self-respect. Looking back, I realized the truth can be buried for a long time, but once a single crack appears, it bursts forth unstoppable. I knew tomorrow would bring more storms, but that night, for the first time in a long while, I felt truly heard, believed, and above all, ready to step out of the darkness. Chapter 9. Hitting Rock. Bottom rising up and reclaiming justice. After that night, when the truth exploded at my mother-in-law's house, my life felt like it had been turned upside down all over again. Mark moved out within a few days. Kathy disappeared into silence, avoiding everyone, sending desperate texts to my mother, then deleting them, then texting again. But people's sympathy had run dry. The evidence was overwhelming, and I, the shattered but resilient victim, was all that remained. I began to reclaim my house, gathering up all the little things Kathy had taken over. Sometimes I'd open a closet and find my perfume mixed with her cosmetics, my nightgown relabeled, even my notebooks marked with unfamiliar handwriting. I walked through each room, bedroom, living room, nursery, and realized they had been planning to erase me from this home from the start. Luckily, I wasn't alone anymore. Janet and Emma, my two most steadfast friends, were always by my side. They helped me find a lawyer, showed me how to inventory assets, how to keep records of every financial transaction and every suspicious conversation. Dr. Brennan proactively reached out to my attorney, ready to testify if needed, confirming that I was perfectly sane and had been manipulated and controlled by Mark for months. Walking into the divorce battle, I was no longer the fragile woman I used to be. Every time I went to court, I brought stacks of evidence, photos of pill bottles, printed emails, Janet's audio recording from that night, texts from Kathy's ex, even Kathy's annotated medical textbooks about dosages and how to fake a miscarriage without alerting the hospital. Even my mother-in-law, who once trusted Mark unconditionally, took my side, ready to testify. She said, "All I want is for my daughter-in-law to get justice. It hurts that my son did this, but I can't defend what's wrong. Mark fought until the bitter end. He hired a new lawyer, even brought in a fake psychologist to claim I was mentally unstable, filed mountains of evidence about my supposed depression, jealousy, lack of control. But every time Dr. Brennan tore it all apart in court, I kept building my wall of evidence, never giving Mark a single chance to push me out of my own home. Kathy tried every angle to play the victim too, crying, apologizing, begging for forgiveness, claiming Mark manipulated me too. I just wanted to help you have a child. But it was too late. No one believed her anymore, not even my own mother. For the first time in years, my mom stood by me without blame or accusation. She hugged me and said, "You've suffered enough. From now on, no one is allowed to hurt you." Gradually, I found myself truly healing. I threw myself back into work, rediscovered joy in small things, making a cup of coffee in the morning, planting flowers on the porch, even rebuilding my children's book collection for the nursery, knowing it might be a long time, maybe never, before I had the courage to try for another child. But I wasn't running from my pain anymore. One day, Janet smiled and said, "We have to host a real dinner here. This house needs real laughter." That first dinner, just me, Janet, Emma, and my mother-in-law, was the moment I realized I wasn't alone anymore. No one could ever again control me, manipulate my emotions, or steal the future I deserved. Sometimes I still woke up in the night, startled by those awful memories, Kathy's sobs, Mark's cold eyes, the times I'd locked myself in my room, terrified I'd be taken to a mental hospital. But I learned to breathe deep and remind myself, it's over now. I'm in control. On the day the court finalized the division of assets, I quietly signed my name, accepted the keys to my house, and received enough financial support to start over. Mark passed me in the hallway without meeting my eyes. Kathy hid her face, clutching her pregnant belly. I felt no triumph, no vindication, just relief, as if a massive boulder had finally been lifted from my chest. I went home, tidied up the nursery, packed away old baby things into a keepsake box. On the desk was a letter from my mother-in-law. "You deserve happiness, trust, and real love. Don't ever let anyone erase you from your own life again." I sat alone in the room, sunlight shining through the freshly painted window, feeling for the first time like I truly owned my space, my breath, and my future. In the end, I can't say that I won, because in this world, no one truly wins after suffering such profound loss, but I survived. I found myself again. I built a new family out of friends, out of women who had walked through pain just like I did. Kathy and Mark each paid the price for their choices without the need for a courtroom or a noisy scandal. Sometimes justice is absolute silence. It's the simple fact that they'll never again have the chance to manipulate or control anyone. I learned something. What's stolen, love, trust, dreams, may never come back the way it once was. But the courage to move forward, to forgive yourself, and to open your heart to new happiness, that's something no one can ever take away. If you've ever been hurt, betrayed, or wondered whether you still deserve love, remember, as long as you have the courage to keep going to rewrite your own story, you're already victorious. Thank you for listening all the way to the very end of this story. If this is one of those true Reddit stories that touched you to your core, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode where the truth is told in the voices of those who were once silent.